Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am here with the writing team. How's it going? Ian, Aaron, Sarah.
Busy, really busy in the word mines, just writing and writing and writing.
I can imagine. We are here to answer some common questions and go over Sarah's dev diary and talk about all the cool stuff about fire and the narrative things that we can reveal so far. So, why don't we start with that? Hi, Sarah. Would you
Hi.
like to talk about the theme of control and how fire fits into the Seattle court in our story?
Sure. So as we know from Bloodlines 1, like control in general is like a very big thing in this world. You've got lots of different people trying to use you, and that's very much the same for Bloodlines 2 and for our protagonist. So obviously she is physically compromised. She's been branded and trapped within Seattle for reasons that you will soon find out. And other people, because of her elder status, see her as this powerful weapon, this tool. And so they're all kind of vying for control of her, but also no one really wants to make her believe that, she can be her own person, I guess. If she's powerful enough to go and do her own thing, then they can't control her. So everyone's trying to kind of put her in a place and get her to serve them through manipulative means. Whilst she is an elder and she is powerful, she is suppressed. She has no allies, no resources, none of the things that an elder would typically have to lend them a portion of their at least social power. So she is still quite reliant on the people around her, and she's very much trying to get control back and get that agency back.
I think possibly the kind of flip side to it is because she is an elder, she is powerful, and as Sarah said, she is has a lot of potential as a weapon or a tool. So nobody wants to take her on directly. They all kind of have to politically work their way around her and evaluate her and figure out what she wants and what she's trying to do and manipulate her into where she becomes useful for them or allied to them. So it's not as if you're an ingenue coming into a space and people are just going, oh, okay, you've got to prove yourself at the court, you've got to do this, that, and the other. This is a powerful, powerful playing piece, if you like, that's been dropped into this situation. And that has loads of knock-on effects for how people treat her and where she can fit in the map of Seattle.
The playing piece idea is a really good one too, because the part of the fact of fire being a recent arrival as well and an unknown quantity means she could be a pawn. She could also be a rook. She could be a knight. She could be a queen, and nobody really knows what that is. And the player kind of gets to decide a little bit about how much they share of that.
I guess that kind of leads us into the way that you can role play as fire. And one of the community members did have a question about this from the Dark Urge. How do we balance role playing and making the character their own? And there's a whole system for this, right?
Yeah, so in terms of role playing, so obviously you can choose your clan. It's about your disciplines, but also, yeah, your people's attitudes towards you. I know we've announced Tremere and Bruja, so that's going to have a very different reaction. Like Bruja and Ventru Prince, not so good. But then also, if you're Tremere, you're kind of a usurper. So some clans might react to you better than others. So yeah, depending on whether they know your clan and obviously whether they give a shit. So yeah, that does have options. There are options that are sometimes, there are choice options sometimes that are clan specific to give you more opportunities to role play harder into your clan. Obviously, you don't have to. You can decide, no, I'm a Tremere who would do this. Or, I'm a really calm Bruja, as if. And then also, if people know, then it might factor into the reason why they do something or into their perception of you. They might tell you their first impression of you, and it might be quite different depending on your clan. They might also compare your actions to the reputation of your clan. So if you do something which is, very calm and, level-headed, and you're a Bruja, then they might be like, you are rare, you know. And then on top of that, we're allowing you to kind of basically choose Fire's backstory and who she is now. So Fire's always meant to be this very Quicksilver character, very adaptable, but her whole thing has really been, we wanted to answer the question of how does a kindred that old come to be that old? Like, what keeps you alive when actually, you know, being a kindred in this world is actually very, very dangerous, even if you're as sort of strong as Fire. So what are the things that would keep you alive? And for Fire, it's been adaptation and changing, and that kind of allows a lot of leeway for players to really pick what the kind of Fire they've been in past lives, like obviously within the same lifetime, but you know what I mean. And also now, so they can choose things not just about, you know, which clan they were, but also, yeah, what are the things you did? What's your story leading up to this point? But also, yeah, who are you now? Like, how do you want to navigate this social scene? Like, how do you want to come across to people? Are you someone who uses the fact that you're an elder to your advantage to kind of push other people down? Or do you kind of play the snaky game of, you know, trying to butter everyone up and feed the narcissist? Or do you kind of say, I'm not going to play your games, flip the table. I know exactly what you're doing and I'm going to spell everything out. I refuse to, subsex is for cowards, you know.
I think there's also a trade-off here between the legend of Fire, if you like, who she was, who they were in past times, because she comes with baggage. But that is something, as Sarah said, that there is a story about what Fire was, and we let the player make choices about that story as the game plays out. And then there is now, right? There is what people have heard of her and what they think she is. And then there is how she behaves in her actions now, and whether the two are the same or whether they vary. It's very much up to the choices that you take when you're interacting with all the people in the world.
And keep in mind, there's also the aspect of being a hunter in this modern society. And so how you approach other non-conversation encounters as well can help build the narrative of who you are as a character and who Fire is. How does she comport herself in this world?
And then there are the normal things you would expect, I mean, outside the writing, in terms of the progression and how you, what skills you choose for the character, how that develops. And as Sarah said, the choice of clan also affects loads of things, not only from what powers you have, but from how people treat you in the world. If they believe that Fire is a particular clan, and they're of a particular clan, they'll treat you in a different way than if the clans are. I'm trying not to give away what the clans are, which is why I'm kind of talking in small circles there.
I can't remember whether this will be released before or after we've told everyone everything. So yeah, we'll
add to that as well. So it's not just about, you choosing these things and it's like cool story, bro, sort of thing. It's the game will respond to that as well. So depending on how you treat people like to be treated in different ways. And so part of this is very much about reading the person and deciding, is this someone who, if I butter them up, will that help me get my way? Versus, is this someone who likes to be met head on? Is this someone who likes to, have things acknowledged that, okay, yeah, we both see things the same way. And like, what's the best way when reading this person to approach the situation? And people, if you approach it not the wrong way, but in a way they don't like, you might get a different response. And that might be what you want, because you can be either trying to play the game socially, or you might be thinking, no, this is my Fire. Like, oh god, my Fire. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So you might decide that you just want to role play Fire to be someone who is more dominant, like most of the time, or more maybe a bit of a sycophant, or maybe that what could be conceived as being a sycophant is actually genuine humanity. That's completely up to you, but that will be reflected. So it's true both in the ways that people respond to you, but also in the ways that people react to you longer term and how they perceive you. So there's the immediate, this is how dare you speak to me like that, or the longer term, like, you really come across as this kind of person to me. but also, you know, generally, like, what's the general consensus about you? How do you fare, you know, if certain characters have eyes everywhere?
Yeah.
If they can see you speaking to people in different ways, how does that pan out?
Which something I talked about in the reveal actually is this is not like a game where you choose the kind of renegade paragon for the whole of. I mean, you can always play fire this particular way, as Sarah said, but really you are likely to be choosing very carefully how you react to certain people. As you know, Vampire is a game of politics, right? And so if you go and are cheeky to everybody, maybe that's not a good choice. So you get to pick and choose.
Exactly. And I think just to speak a little bit to the direction here. So when we were figuring out the approach to choices in this game, we were thinking, okay, how does a vampire navigate this kind of world? And again, it's, you know, you can choose to do it as role play. It's like, this is who I am. But I think very few vampires are actually presenting themselves as who they actually are and, you know, how they actually feel. It's all about manipulating and scheming. So this wasn't about like, I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person. It's about playing the game. And so we were thinking, okay, what kind of different approaches would both hopefully feel satisfying, but also would be something that a kindred would choose in these kind of situations. In a social situation, are you like, you might be trying to butter someone up. You might be trying to, you know, stomp someone into submission. You might be trying to play your cards, show your hand, or keep your hand closer to your chest. And it's all about strategy at the end of the game, and end of the day. But also the game.
There's actually also
affect the endings, right?
Yes, it does affect the endings.
This also harkens back a little bit to even the TTRPG roots as well, where you have someone there being that character and being a fully, ideally, hopefully fully realized three-dimensional character. We want to make sure that there's not a two-dimensional response to that character. If you want something from them, what do you need to do to get that something?
Mm.
And what paths do you choose to take to get there?
One thing I always think about is when I read the Anne Rice novels and I got to Vampire Lestat, which is the second one, and suddenly it was sort of delving into the history of Lestat and what it means to be someone who is that old. And the novel starts with him waking up after a long, long time in the 21st century, and he's comparing like, you know, rock music to harpsichords. And it's just this beautiful chapter of like all these comparisons and stepping into the head of someone who has no knowledge of our world whatsoever. And so you kind of vicariously get to re-experience our world for the first time, which is so exciting and so interesting. And that is, for me, one of my favorite parts of dealing with an elder like Fire, because like they've seen so much and they've had this long gap of torpor and everything is so new, and that's just really refreshing and exciting and interesting, and it makes just everything pop again for the first time. It makes everything fresh. So there's lots of cool history to explore as well. So, you know, we're looking at the time period that Fire has been alive, unalive, all the different things that they might have experienced, again depending largely on player choice. But you know, we know certain things about Fire's history, primarily, for example, like where they started their own life, and that gives us a few anchor points. And I learned some really cool history about that particular part of history that it was just so fun to research and write about.
One thing that I liked about the elder aspect is that we also don't have to explain a lot of things to Fire. Fire's been a kindred for a long time and knows a lot of things, and especially that survival aspect that you touched on earlier. She knows how to survive in this world. It's just she doesn't know the rules of this particular time. So that's a lot of, there's been some interesting subversions there that we've been able to do, and looking at, well, this is similar to this thing, but the difference is, oh, those details, those will trip you up.
Although the difficulty, of course, with all of that is that the player doesn't necessarily have the knowledge that Fire has and doesn't necessarily have that experience. So because this, obviously this title's got to appeal to people who know Vampire the Masquerade and people who don't. And so it's a delicate balancing act between things that fire knows and the player doesn't, and we don't want to disconnect the player from fire, and things that we need to get in for players to understand a new space that they've never seen either, or a new world that they've never seen. And this is where, again, going back to the character reveal, this is where we find the second character we've been talking about, Fabian, useful. And so you've got this interesting kind of connection between the two of them. You've got the fire, who really knows a lot about being a vampire because she's been a vampire for a long time, and you have Fabian, who knows a lot about the modern day. And so we can use the two to bounce off each other to get the player clued into what's going on, and the two of them together, hopefully the two of them together should survive.
The community member Max Doom was asking, will the game cover the social aspects of being an elder, like older values, technologies, and getting to grips with that, as well as relationships with younger vampires?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is Fire is very adaptable. She's a quick study. So with things that she's learning for the first time, especially with Fabian's help, it's not a case that the entire game she doesn't know how to use an elevator, for instance. She's like, what is this magic? It's going to be a sort of quick moment of, oh, what is this thing? Wait, you mean there was a second World War? And then move on. We're not going to overdo it. You're kind of almost inhabiting the space between them in a way. You are Fire, but Fabian is an influence. So Fire has certain attitudes. One of the things that actually I forgot to mention earlier, one of the interesting things about an elder is the sort of ennui of time and the way that you get kind of cold and detached. And so the player is in a really interesting position where they can kind of choose how much influence he's having versus how much Fire is sticking to, no, this is the way I am. And that's very much available in the choices and will be reflected.
There can also be some interesting things too in Fabian challenging Fire on, well, why do you think that thing? This is the thing that you've established you think. Why do you think that? And then exploring that cynicism of the ennui that you mentioned. Because if everything gets boring after a while, that's how do you keep things from getting boring? Ugh.
How do you see humans as anything but cattle? But then, as Sarah said, it's kind of up to the player as to whether they respond to Fabian interrogating that, or whether you go, no, humans, they're cattle.
Yep.
There's also another question from the community about the tone of the game, which is from Kingdom Sower. Is this game going to be overly serious, kind of campy, or how are you building the levity into it? Because obviously horror, tension, levity, you can't have one all the time. So yeah, how are you writing that together?
I think it's worth saying that, like any, I'd hope, well-told story, we have a little bit of everything. Different characters are drawn in different ways. If there's comedy in it, it's not because somebody believes they're the comic relief. That's just the way they act, right? People are people, and there's a wide variety of them. And the background of Vampire the Masquerade lets us be slightly larger than life rather than deeply, deeply realistic, because that's the franchise, right? It's got that edge to it. It's got that slight liveliness to it, which actually I think dovetails nicely with our concept about how vampires perceive the world. They're looking at islands of life and islands of darkness, and that is a wider range than happens to us in our boring day-to-day lives. So hopefully you'll see bits of humor, bits of joy, bits of despair, all slightly more exaggerated than we have in reality.
I think it's worth saying as well that it depends who you talk to. In Bloodlines 1, talking to Officer Chunk is a very different experience than talking to, LaCroix. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's about the person, and also different kinds of humor as well. So a character like say Tolly, who we've seen in the earlier reveal, he might be a lot more overtly witty. Whereas for a character like Fire, a lot of the humor comes from the fact that she doesn't know what some things are, or the contrast between someone like her and another character who is so opposite produces opportunities for humor. And that's partly why Fabian's there as well. He is an opportunity for the player character to have their own moments of humor. Even for someone like Fire is generally like, she can be more serious, but that produces a humor of its own. And yeah, we get it from the surrounding cast in their different flavors.
Yeah, I like to think of having realistic responses to unrealistic situations. These are still monsters by definition. Right there in the original rule book, you're playing a monster. These are not nice people. Maybe you want to do a nice thing, but at the end of the day, you got to bite that person and suck out their vitae. Good times.
All right, well, thank you for your time, everyone. I can't wait to take a look at more community questions later down the line and see what more reveals we have for people later. Goodbye, everyone.
Cool, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.